I know you're doing dead bug variations because you've been told they're one of the best ways to strengthen your hypermobile hip flexors, but you're probably not doing them correctly. I'm going to give you a few small tweaks that are going to make a massive impact. This is your deep dive on single leg lifts or dead bug variations. I also want to mention that I'm only going to show you the single leg lift variation, and that's for a couple of reasons. First, this is about beginner deep core work, and this is how we start. And second, I'm going to be showing you all sorts of variations of these and leg slides throughout the month of April as we continue talking about waking up sleepy glutes, happier hip flexors, all those things. Let's dive into it. I'm going to give you form and alignment, how to do it, what the muscles are doing, and some modifications that you can make. Let's get started with alignment. Go ahead and lie down, and I'm going to give you some cues starting head to toe. Position your head so there's a 90-degree angle between your chin and your neck. This is going to keep your airway open. If you have a tendency to lengthen your neck against the floor, this is going to feel like you have your chin really high up. I promise you don't. And then we're going to rest our arms straight down at our sides, and we want to try to flip our palms up toward the ceiling if possible. This creates a slight external rotation of our shoulders. This will help to relax the back of the shoulders into the surface below you, opening the front of the shoulders. Keeping our palms down encourages more of an internal rotation of the shoulders, and we can end up pushing against the surface below us, creating unnecessary tension. And so for those reasons, we want to try to flip our palms up if we can and get that external rotation that will also help us relax and open into our chest and make breathing a little bit easier as well. Our spine and pelvis should be in neutral. This is going to look and feel a little bit different for everybody. There may be a little bit of space between your lumbar spine and the surface below you. There may not be. We just want to make sure we're not pulling away from the floor and arching our low back. And we also want to make sure that we're not directly pushing our low back into the floor either. Legs should be about hips distance apart, soles of the feet on the floor, knees bent. We want our inner thighs to be slightly active, meaning that it's almost like there's an invisible force, a magnet, just gently pulling them toward one another so that they don't fall toward the outside, creating a line of stability. And then position your feet far enough away from your pelvis that the triangle of space created in between is evenly sided. So we don't want our feet too close or too far from our pelvis. And then in addition to having our feet hips distance apart, we also want to try to have them parallel, meaning our toes are pointing straight ahead and in line with our heels. Now that we're here, let's get started with the move. The first thing to note is that because this is deep core and hip flexor work, we want everything above that area to be as relaxed as it possibly can. And this is part of why breathing is important. So take an inhale first, and then on your exhale, gently activate your deep core, compressing up and in your transverse abdominis and your pelvic floor. This is steadying your pelvis, and then your hip flexors begin to lift your leg towards your hip bones, not passing it, keeping your leg bent at a 90-degree angle. The knee shouldn't move during this exercise. It should stay the same angle the entire time. We're going to inhale, lowering the foot to the floor, and then repeating that on the same side, exhaling, gently compressing core and pelvic floor up and in, and then hip flexors lifting that leg toward the hip bone, not going past it. Inhale, lower, not holding any tension on our neck or upper body as much as possible. It should basically look like you're sleeping, making sure to keep that chin just slightly elevated, that 90-degree angle, keeping the airway open. And remember, the entire purpose of this is that our pelvis stays in neutral, stays steady the entire time. So as you exhale, first activating your core as a way to stabilize your pelvis, then hip flexors fire up and begin bringing that knee toward the hip bones, coordinating their efforts with one another. If you want to make sure that your pelvis is not moving, that you're holding it in a neutral position, you can put your hands anywhere that you need to in order to feel for that. You can also place a really light item on your lower abdominals. If it spills forward or back, that's going to give you an indication that your pelvis is moving too much. And that's okay. Practice makes perfect. These are not easy. I'm going to switch sides and continue moving with my breath, exhaling as I bring my knee up toward my hip bones and inhaling as I lower. And let's just talk a little bit more about what's going on in the body right now. As my leg comes up toward my hips, my lumbar stabilizers like my multifidus are working to help hold my pelvis in neutral. And as I lower my leg away from my pelvis, it's my lower abdominals, the lower part of the rectus abdominis, and the transverse abdominis that are helping to hold the pelvis in neutral that direction. And so, if we're unable to stop our pelvis from tilting forward and our low back arching, that's typically an indication of lack of lower abdominal strength or just an inability to make that connection when our body needs it. And in the reverse, if we're unable to stop our pelvis from tucking, our low back from flexing, this is going to be an indication of weak lumbar extensors and stabilizers. A couple of other things to note. If the knee naturally comes up over the hip bone, this is usually an indication that either the hip flexors or the deep core are just a little bit too weak to be able to coordinate their efforts and hold each other up. Rather than creating tension or doing it incorrectly, just go ahead and bring your knee in a little bit closer over your hip bone. And as you work on building stability and that mind muscle connection, you'll likely be able to do it without needing to bring your knee in over your hip bone. Another thing is if you notice that it's hard to hold the foot up in line with the knee, holding at a 90-degree angle, this is typically an indication of either weak quadriceps, weak knees, or a combination of both. And again, if it's painful, absolutely decrease that angle, let your foot hang a little bit lower. If you feel any pulling or tight sensation over the hip, over that hip flexor area as you pull your knee up, just bring your knee up to the point right before you start to feel that irritation and then go ahead and lower it from there. That's your current range of motion. And then, depending on your body and what's going on, you may eventually be able to bring your knee in a little bit further as you progress, as you get both stronger and more mobilized in that hip flexor. Last, I want to show you one of my favorite assists that I think almost everybody should be starting with. And that is propping something under the sacrum when doing these so that it puts the pelvis in a slight posterior tilt. This may seem counterintuitive because I've been talking about holding the pelvis in neutral, but stick with me. The hardest way to strengthen a muscle is concentrically, meaning in a shortened position, and that's exactly what we're doing with the hip flexors here. And because of the relationship between the hip flexors, the psoas, and deep core stability, we know that our lumbar spine is going to be one of those first things compromised if either one of those are not strong enough. By propping our pelvis, we're lengthening our hip flexors, which reduces the challenge to those muscles without making it unchallenging. It basically gives them an opportunity to learn how to do this movement without putting so much pressure on them, quite literally. And then same thing with the low back, the lumbar spine, and the abdominals. It gives everything an opportunity to strengthen, stabilize, and learn how to coordinate this movement before going into a fully neutral position and risking low back irritation or worse, injury. And last, because so many hypermobile people will naturally hyperextend their low back in a number of situations, I find that it's really, really important to help the body learn how to hold a slight tuck. Not because we want to be standing in a posterior tuck all the time, but because we are going to be constantly adjusting our body out of hyperextension by tucking our pelvis into a more neutral alignment. And that's a wrap on single leg lifts. Let me know if you found this helpful. I'll see you back here for your sleepy glutes and unhappy hip flexors.